Alpha King found Beta's daughter weeping in kitchen. Omega scars revealed a dark truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Megan stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen. Her shoulders slumped as her tears fell freely onto the cold stone countertop. The once vibrant smell of freshly baked bread now felt distant, as if the warmth of the kitchen had been swallowed by an icy void. She had always been taught to hide her emotions, to keep her feelings bottled up inside. But today was different. The weight of the rejection, the constant whispers behind her back, had finally taken its toll. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, but Megan didn't look up. She knew it was him, the Alpha King, the powerful ruler of their land. Elias. She had heard of his cruelty, his unmatched strength, and his terrifying presence. But what was even more terrifying was the way he had been watching her recently, as if there was something about her that he couldn't quite figure out. Megan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself, but it was too late. He had already entered the kitchen. Megan, his deep voice broke the silence. His tone wasn't harsh, but there was something about it that made her heart race. He stood there, tall and imposing, his silver eyes studying her every movement. She could feel the weight of his gaze, and it only made her want to shrink further into herself. She was nothing. What's wrong? Elias asked, his voice softening, though his eyes remained sharp. Megan wanted to respond, to explain the hurt that had been building inside her for so long, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just shook her head, too tired to fight the tears. Elias took a step forward, his heavy boots echoing on the stone floor. Megan, look at me, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Hesitant, she raised her gaze to meet his, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected the softness in his eyes, nor the hint of concern that flickered there. But there was more, something deeper in his gaze, something that Megan couldn't quite grasp. You're not just any Omega, are you? He murmured, almost to himself. Megan's breath caught. How could he know? How could anyone know? She had worked so hard to hide her scars, to bury the truth that haunted her. But in that moment, Elias seemed to see through it all. She could feel her heart racing in her chest as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The scars, Megan, Elias continued, his voice low and steady. The ones you hide so carefully. They tell a story, one you've been running from. His words hit her like a physical blow, but there was no anger in his voice, only the deep understanding of someone who had seen pain, someone who knew what it felt like to hide the darkest parts of yourself. Megan's chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to hide. The walls she had spent so long building came crashing down, and with them, the truth she had buried so deep. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to be seen as weak. Elias knelt down beside her, his large frame looming over her in a protective way, and for the first time, Megan felt safe. She felt understood. You're not weak, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone anymore. Megan didn't know what to say. She had never been shown kindness like this before. It was as if Elias, the Alpha King, had seen something in her that no one else had. Maybe, just maybe, he saw her as more than just an Omega. Maybe, for the first time, someone was truly seeing her. And that thought, the thought that someone might actually care, was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her after all. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Elias's words settle deep within her. For so long, she had carried the burden of silence, the shame of being different. But now, with him kneeling before her, there was a strange sense of calm that began to fill the space where fear used to reside. The kitchen, once a place of isolation, now felt like the safest room in the world. Elias didn't move away, his presence still solid and unwavering. Megan, with her tear-streaked face, found herself looking at him differently. The Alpha King, a figure of legend and terror, was here, beside her, not as a ruler, but as someone who saw her for who she truly was. You don't have to hide anymore, Elias said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her chest ache. The scars, Megan, they're not your shame. They are part of you, but they don't define you. You're more than what happened to you. Megan swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had spent so many years hiding from her own reflection, avoiding the truth about herself. But now, here he was, someone who didn't seem to care about the imperfections she believed made her unworthy. But I'm just an Omega, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm nothing. I have nothing to offer. Elias reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His touch was firm but kind, offering her a sense of reassurance that felt like a lifeline. You're not just an Omega, he said, his words firm, filled with certainty. You're strong, Megan. You're resilient. I can see it in the way you've survived everything thrown your way. And that strength, it's something I've never seen before. She felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words, but before she could say anything, Elias stood up, towering over her. For a moment, he simply watched her, his gaze intense, but there was no judgment in it. Only understanding. Come with me, he said, offering her a hand. Megan hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but something in his eyes made her trust him. She stood slowly, taking his hand, and felt a spark of warmth run through her as their fingers touched. As they moved through the kitchen and out into the hallway, Megan's mind raced. What was happening? How had Elias, the mighty Alpha King, come to care so much about her? She had spent her life being invisible, watching from the shadows as others flourished. As alphas and betas lived their lives with purpose and power, she had been nothing but a bystander in her own story. But now, Elias was here, offering her something she had never expected, acceptance. They reached the door, and Elias opened it, stepping aside to let her through first. Megan walked into the quiet, moonlit garden outside, where the cool night air greeted her. She shivered slightly, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming emotions she was experiencing. This is where I come to think, Elias said, following her out into the garden. I come here to escape the weight of the world. Megan glanced at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. He wasn't just the powerful Alpha King she had heard about. He was a person, with doubts and struggles of his own. For a brief moment, she found herself questioning everything she had believed about him. They stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Finally, Elias spoke again, his voice softer this time. Megan, I don't know what's been done to you, but I promise you, I'll help you. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Her heart swelled with emotion at his words. She had never known a kindness like this before. For so long, she had believed that no one could see her, that she was destined to fade into the background, a mere shadow of what she could have been. But now, Elias had not only seen her, but he had also accepted her. And in that moment, Megan realized something. She wasn't just some broken Omega. She was someone worthy of love, someone who could stand tall. And Elias, despite his own darkness, had shown her that. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Elias continued, his eyes meeting hers. You've already shown more strength than I ever thought possible. I see you, Megan, and I won't let anything happen to you. Megan nodded slowly, feeling a surge of gratitude wash over her. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had someone by her side, someone who would fight for her. As they stood there, under the moonlight, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her after all. Megan stood in the garden, her mind racing. The moonlight above her seemed to carry an ethereal glow, casting a gentle light across the landscape. The cool night air brushed against her skin, and for the first time in so long, she felt a sense of peace. Elias was standing beside her, but this time, his presence felt different. No longer just a figure of authority, he seemed more human, more vulnerable. Megan glanced at him, noticing the way his eyes softened when they met hers. He wasn't the cold, distant Alpha King she had once feared. Instead, he was someone who, despite his power and responsibilities, was offering her something no one else had ever given her: understanding. You know, Elias began, breaking the silence. I never thought I would find someone like you. Megan looked at him, unsure of what he meant. Someone like me? She asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Someone who carries such strength without even realizing it. Elias replied, his voice gentle but full of conviction. You've been through so much, Megan, and yet you still stand. You are far stronger than you give yourself credit for. Megan's heart swelled with emotion. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before. All her life, she had been told she was weak, insignificant, just another Omega to be overlooked. But now, here was Elias, the Alpha King, telling her that she was strong. His words felt like a lifeline, pulling her from the darkness she had been drowning in. I've never thought of myself as strong, Megan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always been told I was nothing, just someone to be tossed aside. Elias turned to face her fully, his eyes intense and searching. Those people are wrong. You're not nothing, Megan. You are worthy of love, of respect, and of a future where you can stand proud. I see that in you. Megan felt her breath catch in her throat. No one had ever looked at her that way before. No one had ever seen past the surface to understand her true worth. And here Elias was, seeing her, truly seeing her. But how can you see that? She asked, her voice tinged with doubt. How can you see something that I've hidden for so long? Elias took a step closer, his presence grounding her. Because I've been where you are, he said quietly. I've carried my own burdens, my own darkness. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to think that no one could ever truly understand. But I also know that healing is possible. And you, Megan, you have the strength to heal. For a moment, Megan stood there, processing his words. She had always thought of herself as broken, like a puzzle missing too many pieces. But Elias was telling her that she wasn't broken, that she could heal, that she had the power to overcome the pain that had shaped her life. She didn't know what to say, but her heart was telling her that, for the first time, she didn't have to carry that burden alone. I don't know if I can ever truly believe that, Megan said softly. But for the first time, I feel like maybe I don't have to be afraid anymore. Elias reached out, placing his hand gently on her arm. His touch was warm and reassuring, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. You don't have to be afraid, he said, his voice firm yet gentle. I'll be here, Megan, and I'll help you find your way. We'll face the darkness together. The weight of his words settled in Megan's chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe she could finally heal, that maybe there was more to her than the scars she had carried for so long. And as she looked up at Elias, standing beside her under the moonlight, she realized that this was just the beginning. A new chapter was waiting for her, one where she didn't have to hide anymore. A chapter where she could finally be seen, for who she truly was. Megan's life had been a series of quiet moments, spent in the shadows, avoiding the gaze of those who saw her as less than nothing. But now, standing in the garden with Elias, she felt as though the world was shifting around her. The night air, cool and crisp, carried a promise of something new, something she never thought possible. As Elias spoke, his words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, a safety she had never known. He didn't look at her as though she was weak or invisible. He looked at her like she mattered. You're not alone anymore, Megan, Elias repeated, his voice low and soothing. And you never will be again. Megan swallowed hard, her emotions swirling within her like a storm. For the first time, she believed him. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could belong. I'm not used to this, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I've always been the one who stays in the background, who doesn't matter. But you make me feel like I'm more than that. Elias turned toward her, his gaze intense, yet filled with a tenderness that took Megan by surprise. You are more than that, he said, his voice unwavering. I see you, Megan. I see the strength you've carried all these years. The strength you've hidden, but I see it now. You don't have to hide from anyone, least of all me. Megan's heart fluttered in her chest, and for a moment, she wondered if this was a dream. Could it be possible that someone, especially someone like Elias, could truly see her? Could he really see past the brokenness, past the scars that ran deeper than her skin? She felt his presence like a beacon of light in her darkness, pulling her towards something she had always feared to hope for. How can you say that? Megan asked, her voice filled with disbelief. How can you see anything worth saving? Elias took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Because I've been where you are, he said quietly, his voice filled with a depth that spoke of his own struggles. I felt like I wasn't enough, like I was broken beyond repair. But we all have our wounds, Megan. And it's not the wounds that define us. It's how we heal, how we rise from them. That's what matters. Megan's breath caught in her throat, and she felt her walls, the ones she had spent years building, begin to crumble. She had never allowed anyone to get close enough to see the real her, not since the day she had learned that she was different from everyone else. But now, standing here with Elias, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. Could it be that he was right? Could she, too, rise from the scars she had been hiding for so long? I don't know how to do that, Megan admitted, her voice trembling. I don't know how to stop being afraid of everything, of myself. Elias placed a hand gently on her arm, his touch grounding her. I'll help you, Megan, he said softly. You don't have to figure it out alone. I'm not going anywhere. We'll take it one step at a time. Megan looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. There was still fear, yes, but there was also something else, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could begin to heal. Hope that maybe, for the first time in her life, she could learn to stand tall. The night seemed to stretch on, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. There was a lightness in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known she was missing. And as she stood there, in the quiet of the garden, with Elias by her side, Megan realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, and there would be days when the darkness would try to pull her back. But she also knew that she didn't have to face it alone. Elias was with her, and that gave her more strength than she had ever believed she had. For the first time, she felt like she was worth something. And that thought, that realization, made all the difference. Megan stood beside Elias, the cool night air now carrying a subtle warmth, a promise of something new. They had been walking through the garden for what felt like hours, though neither had spoken much. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but rather peaceful, as though they both understood that sometimes words were unnecessary. Elias, for his part, had kept a steady pace beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. He never rushed her, never pushed her. It was as though he understood that healing, especially the kind she needed, could not be forced. Megan felt the tension slowly easing from her shoulders, as if each step was taking her further from the weight she had been carrying for so long. For the first time in years, she felt light, free even, like a heavy burden had been lifted from her chest. She glanced at Elias, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him, how much his mere presence calmed the storm inside her. Elias, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, how do you do it? How do you carry the weight of everything and still stand so strong? Elias glanced at her, his expression thoughtful, almost as if he were considering her question carefully. It's not easy, he admitted, his voice low. But I've learned that strength doesn't come from hiding your pain. It comes from facing it, accepting it, and then moving forward. Megan nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood what he meant. She had spent so much of her life running from her pain, trying to bury it so deep that it wouldn't hurt her anymore. But Elias was right. She had spent too long hiding, too long letting her scars define her. I'm afraid, she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. Afraid of what comes next. Afraid of not being strong enough to face the things I've been running from. Elias stopped walking for a moment and turned to her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just understanding. He reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face it all at once, Megan, he said softly. Healing is not a straight line. It's okay to take things one step at a time. What matters is that you're willing to take that first step. Megan felt her heart flutter in her chest. Elias's words were like a balm to her weary soul, soothing the ache that had settled deep within her for so long. She had been so afraid of the unknown, so terrified of facing her past, but Elias was showing her that she didn't have to do it alone. I want to believe that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I don't know where to start. Elias smiled, his hand still resting on her shoulder. You've already started, he said gently. Just by being here, by opening up to yourself and to me. That's the hardest part. Megan felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't one of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of acceptance. For the first time, she felt like she didn't have to be perfect, that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Elias was right. She had taken the first step, and that was enough for now. Thank you, she said, her voice shaky but sincere. Thank you for seeing me. Elias's smile widened, and for the first time, Megan saw a glimmer of warmth in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. "There's nothing to thank me for," he replied softly. "I see you because you're worth seeing." Megan's heart skipped a beat, and she realized in that moment that Elias wasn't just offering her hope. He was offering her something far more valuable: acceptance. And it was all she had ever needed. As they continued walking, Megan couldn't help but feel that, for the first time, the future didn't seem so daunting. With Elias by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could face the world without fear. Maybe she could finally heal. Megan woke up early the next morning, the soft rays of sunlight filtering through the window and warming her skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't wake up with the heavy weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. She felt lighter, like she was beginning to breathe again. As she sat up, she noticed Elias's presence beside her. Though he was still asleep, his form stretched out on the bench across the room. He had insisted on staying close to make sure she was safe, even though the night had passed without incident. Megan smiled softly, her heart warmed by the thought of his quiet devotion. It wasn't just the promise of safety that made her feel secure, it was the way he had spoken to her, the way he had made her feel seen. She had never realized how much she had craved being understood, not just by those around her, but by herself as well. Looking over at Elias, Megan realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had come so far since the night they had shared their first conversation. The fear and uncertainty that had ruled her thoughts were now slowly starting to fade. She knew there was still a long road ahead of her, but the weight of her past was starting to lose its power over her. Elias stirred and groggily opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a warmth that made Megan's heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Megan smiled, feeling an unexpected calm wash over her. "Good morning," she replied softly. She could feel the connection between them, subtle but undeniable, like an invisible thread that pulled them closer with every passing moment. Elias sat up and stretched, rubbing his face before looking at her again. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his concern genuine. Megan paused for a moment, considering the question. How was she feeling? The truth was, she felt different. She felt like she was starting to find pieces of herself that had been lost for years. I feel like I'm starting to understand myself more," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm not as afraid as I used to be. I think I'm starting to accept that I don't have to be perfect." Elias nodded, his expression softening as he looked at her. "You don't have to be perfect, Megan. You just have to be yourself. And that's enough." Megan felt the sincerity of his words wash over her. For so long, she had believed that she needed to be someone else in order to be loved, in order to be accepted. But now, Elias was showing her a different path. He wasn't asking her to change or hide. He was asking her to be herself, the way he saw her. I think I can do that," Megan said, a sense of hope beginning to bloom within her chest. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. With Elias by her side, she no longer had to face it alone. Elias gave her a small smile, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to face it alone," he said softly, as though reading her mind. "We'll face it together." Megan's heart swelled with gratitude. She hadn't realized just how much she needed those words until now. She had always felt like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong, but now, for the first time, she felt like she was finally where she was meant to be. Together, Megan stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond. The morning was bright and full of promise, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could walk into it without fear. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but with Elias by her side, she was ready to face it. She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a new sense of determination. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for showing me that I don't have to hide anymore." Elias stood and walked over to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Megan," he said quietly. "It's my honor to be here for you. And it's an honor to see you finally begin to see the strength I've always seen in you." Megan smiled, the weight of her past finally lifting from her shoulders. She was ready to step into the future, whatever it may hold, and she knew that with Elias by her side, she could face anything. Megan had never realized how much silence could heal until now. As she sat in the garden next to Elias, The gentle rustling of the trees in the morning breeze felt like a soft lullaby to her soul. The sun was rising higher, casting its warm golden light over the world. And for the first time in a long while, Megan didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. There was a peace in the air, a calmness that made her heart feel lighter. She turned to Elias, who had been quiet for a while, his gaze focused on the horizon. There was something comforting in the way he was just being there, a steady presence in the midst of everything. Elias, Megan said softly, breaking the silence. What happens now? Where do we go from here? Elias didn't immediately answer, his eyes still locked on the distant trees, but Megan could see the slight movement of his jaw, as though he was carefully considering his words. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a depth she had come to trust. Now we start living, he said simply, his voice steady, yet filled with a quiet certainty. You've already made the hardest choice, Megan. You've chosen to face the truth, to stop hiding. The rest will fall into place. Megan felt her heart skip a beat at his words. It felt so simple, yet so profound. She had spent so many years running, hiding from herself and the world around her. And now, Elias was telling her that she didn't have to hide anymore. But I don't know how to live without that fear, Megan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've lived in fear for so long. How do I stop? Elias smiled, the warmth in his expression making her feel even more at ease. You don't have to stop right away. Fear is a part of being human. It's okay to feel it, but you don't have to let it control you. You just have to take each day as it comes, one step at a time. And with each step, you'll find that the fear becomes less important. You'll start to see what really matters. Megan let his words sink in. The idea of living without the constant weight of fear felt foreign, but also strangely freeing. She realized that for the first time, she wasn't facing her struggles alone. Elias was beside her, not as a figure of authority, but as someone who cared, someone who wanted to help her find her way. I'll be here, Elias added, his voice soft but firm. You don't have to do it alone. I'll help you, every step of the way. Megan nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never been shown such kindness before, and it was overwhelming in the best way possible. Thank you, she whispered, feeling the sincerity of her words. Elias reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His grip was strong, yet gentle, and it made Megan feel like she had a solid foundation beneath her feet. No thanks necessary, he said with a small smile. You've already taken the most important step. Now, it's time to let go of the past and start building the future you deserve. Megan felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of facing the unknown. With Elias by her side, she felt like she could face anything. Together, they would move forward, one step at a time. The future wasn't as daunting as it had once seemed. It was full of possibilities, full of new beginnings. And for the first time in her life, Megan felt ready to embrace it. Megan woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. The past had never seemed so distant, and she couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed in such a short amount of time. She looked out the window, the sunlight streaming through the trees and casting soft shadows on the ground. The world outside seemed full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the weight of her own fears holding her back. Elias had promised her that they would face everything together, and she was beginning to believe him. With each passing day, the walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble, and the future no longer seemed like an impossible mountain to climb. As she got dressed and prepared to start the day, Megan felt a small but important shift within herself. She had always been afraid of change, terrified of stepping outside her comfort zone. But now, change felt like a welcome friend, one that she was ready to embrace. The thought of facing her challenges head-on, without fear, was no longer daunting. It was empowering. When Megan met Elias later that morning, she found him sitting at the table, looking over some papers. He looked up as she entered, a smile lighting up his face. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice warm and welcoming. Megan returned the smile, feeling a warmth spread through her at the sight of him. He had been her anchor, her steady presence in the storm, and now, she was starting to see the strength she had always carried inside herself. "Good morning," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in the past. She could feel the difference in herself already. Elias stood up and walked over to her, his presence filling the space between them. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his eyes soft with concern. Megan took a deep breath, thinking for a moment. She had been afraid of this question, afraid of the uncertainty it held. But now, she realized she didn't need to be afraid. "I'm feeling good," she said, a quiet confidence in her voice. "I feel ready to move forward." Elias smiled, his eyes gleaming with pride. "I knew you would," he said, his voice steady. "You're stronger than you think, Megan. And I'm proud of how far you've come." Megan's heart fluttered at his words. She had always feared that she was too broken to ever truly be strong. But now, Elias's faith in her made her believe in herself for the first time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For believing in me." Elias placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "You've always had the strength inside you. I just helped you see it." Megan nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone anymore, and with Elias by her side, she could face whatever came next. "So, what's next?" she asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. Elias smiled and led her to the door, his hand resting on her back. "We keep moving forward," he said simply. "One step at a time. Together." Megan took a deep breath as they walked out into the bright morning light. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't seem so frightening. With Elias by her side, Megan felt like she could take on the world. And as they walked together, side by side, she realized that the journey ahead was just beginning. It was a journey of healing, of discovering herself, and of building a future she could be proud of. With Elias's support, Megan knew she could face anything. She was ready to step into the unknown, not with fear, but with hope. Megan walked through the garden, her steps light and her heart even lighter. The air was crisp, and the sun bathed everything in a soft, golden glow. It was a morning like any other, yet it felt different, full of new beginnings. Elias had promised her they would move forward together, and for the first time in her life, Megan truly believed it. She wasn't walking into the unknown alone. Elias was there, walking beside her, and that made all the difference. As they strolled together, the warmth of the sun on her face felt like a silent affirmation, as though the universe itself was telling her that she was on the right path. Elias's presence was comforting, steady, and Megan found herself more and more grateful for him every day. They came to a stop by a small stone bench nestled beneath a tree. Elias motioned for Megan to sit, and she did, her eyes meeting his with a sense of understanding. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft but sincere. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his question. The old, familiar fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind, but it no longer felt as overwhelming. It was manageable, a part of her, but not who she was anymore. "I'm feeling free," she said slowly, her voice steady. "For the first time, I feel like I'm not being held back by everything I've been through. It's like I'm finally seeing the world clearly." Elias's eyes softened, and he smiled at her, his gaze filled with pride. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, sitting beside her. "It's not easy, but you've come a long way, Megan. You've shown more courage than most people ever will." Megan felt warmth spread through her at his words. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, as though she was always standing in the shadows, never quite enough. But now, with Elias beside her, she was starting to understand her own strength. It wasn't just the battles she had fought with the world around her. It was the ones she had fought within herself. And for the first time, she felt like she had won. "You've helped me," she said, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Elias reached out and placed his hand over hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "You've done it, Megan," he said, his voice steady. "I've only been here to remind you of what you're capable of. The rest has been all you." Megan looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. There was no doubt in her mind that Elias had become more than just a guide or a friend. He had become someone she could trust, someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just the person she had pretended to be. "What happens now?" Megan asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Now," Elias said, his eyes locking with hers, "we keep moving forward. Together." Megan smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting off her shoulders. The future, once so uncertain and frightening, now seemed like a world of endless possibilities. She wasn't alone anymore. With Elias beside her, she was ready for whatever came next. As they sat there, in the peaceful quiet of the garden, Megan knew that her journey was just beginning. She had spent so much of her life running from her past, but now, she was facing the future with hope, strength, and the certainty that she could handle whatever it held. With Elias by her side, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. And for the first time in her life, Megan felt truly free.